Hello and welcome to the second lesson of the beginner series. As you probably know, the first one was about combining shapes in a couple different ways to get more complicated results, and this one's about subtracting shapes. So it's just a quick discussion about this simple idea that takes simple shapes and gets you more complicated shapes. So, from the first lesson, I have a little sketch started here that I'm going to use as my example. And just to kind of recap on the first lesson, you might be able to see that, this is kind of a simple shape I've drawn that's just comprised of, two or three simple shapes combined together, right? So we're going to kind of add on to that and use this subtractive thinking to keep going. So what do I mean by subtracting shapes? Literally just that. I kind of call this the cutaway method or the subtractive method. Doesn't matter. There's a couple ways to look at it, which I'll get into. So the first example I'm going to do is really straightforward, and I'm just going to remove some of this so that we go from this simple shape to a slightly more complicated shape. So let's just say I'm going to cut away at this big part here, and I'm going to just cut a square right out of it. Okay. So imagine that, the lines I'm drawing now are removing material. Okay. Oops. Accidentally drew on my original layer. So, I'm gonna just lower the opacity and draw on this fresh one. So I'm just drawing in this new outline, and we can kind of see the inner cross section now. I'm going to blend this edge a little bit. Draw a little bit into this form. So pretty easy, right? That's all I'm talking about. We're just removing material, and now we have a slightly more complicated shape. We can do it again up here, just to give you another quick example. So let's say I'm going to subtract a big kind of angled piece from up here. Is that what I want to do? What do I want to do? Sort of thinking as I go here. We'll do an angle, then we'll go straight back and down. So we're going to remove all that material right there. Right? So I'm going to erase out. Get my black again and draw this new outline. So I know this is simple, but bear with me because we're gonna play with this idea a little bit. So again, I had kind of a simple shape to start with, and then I used simple shapes to subtract with, and I'm getting more complicated shapes as a result, right? I can keep going and kind of use the logic from the first lesson and add back in some simple shapes to this. and it'll get even more complicated. So let's say this is some sort of machine, and this big cut at the back here has exposed some sort of internal, mechanism, right? So I want to add, let's say I want to add just some very simple cylinders to the inside here, right? We've exposed some of this machinery. So we'll just add those in. So we kind of remember, we started with this big simple shape, subtracted some away, got something different, and now I'm going to add back on top of that different shape, and it's going to get me something a little more intricate and a little more complicated. But I started out very simple, and I'm repeating that because that really is the point of this entire lesson. Using simple beginnings to get complicated results, right? It does not have to be difficult to draw, really complicated machines. I want to kind of help, even if you go on to never use this trick or these techniques again. I really want to demystify the process and show you that, coming up with complicated machinery can be done by anyone. So now we have a little bit more of a complicated, mechanism here. I don't know what's going on back here. We're just exposing some machinery, easy. And again, I can keep cutting into this and make it even more complicated. So if I add on, let's see, I add on some kind of bracket between these cylinders, right? Some sort of engine, exposed, tech in the inside here. I just keep adding simple shapes. This is some sort of, I don't know what I kind of just say bracket. And what I mean is just a shape that supports or holds other shapes together. I really should learn more about engines or engineering to make sure I'm using the right terms. But there we go. I'll stop there. I think you get the point. So that's kind of step one, Step one is subtracting simple shapes. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about where to go from here, how to move forward using this technique. So one thing I like to do is we'll keep that up, kind of keeping to remember as our simple starting point. And I'll keep going on this drawing just a bit. So when I call this, I also call, it's subtracting shapes, but I also call it the cutaway method, right? So let's say instead of simply removing material to change a shape, we do more of what I did here, which is we cut away a simple portion and exposed what's going on inside, right? And this is another great way that I feel like is simple, which it's a way of, again, starting simple, using some simple steps, and getting things more complicated. So one more time, I had a simple shape. I have a simple shape. I cut away a simple shape, and I exposed what was going on inside. right? So let's keep going with that up front here, where I cut away the this material. So instead of leaving it as the skin of the object, we cut away to expose what's inside. Now I'm going to just kind of draw for a second. I'm going to add on a couple little things, but I'm going to keep in mind that we're exposing machinery by removing the plating or the skin of the surface of the shape, right? I should probably do this in red so I can clean it up a little bit better, but I've started already, so I'm just going to keep going. So now my brain is kind of switched a little, and what I've done is I'm not thinking, okay, I removed some material to change the shape. No, I've removed some material, remember, by subtracting away to expose more of the machine. Let's just keep it fairly simple. I'm going to just add on some like rail type chassis shapes here. Some framing, if you will. Keep it simple. Draw a couple details. Simple, right? Let's not get overwhelmed here. I just want to introduce the idea of cutting away to expose the juicy insides, because that happens a lot in real machinery, and I'll go into that in a little bit here. But using the cutaway method, I've now started to, I gave myself a place to show where the machine's exposed, and I just added some simple shapes. Sorry if they're not beautifully rendered. I wanted to kind of get to the point, so I just started drawing. Now I got to clean it up, of course, so that my point's a little clearer. But I'm trying to make it quick here. Let's see, we'll do a couple little bolt holes, a couple little divots and indents, easy stuff. Some seams, another bolt down here, and we have a little detail, right? But remember, the beginning of this whole section was me coming to the front of the shape and saying, you know, I'm just going to cut it here, 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 and here. I removed that, and then it gave me this place to expose some of the machinery. Now, this looks, you know, a little empty along here. Here, sorry, this face looks kind of empty and sort of, it looks kind of random that, you know, I've just decided to cut these simple shapes out. So what I'm going to do is, now that I'm past the first simple steps, I'm going to embellish the shape a bit, the design, the machine, so that it looks like these cuts are a little more integrated and they're more a part of the overall design, and they don't look so kind of they don't interrupt the shape so much. And I'm just going to do that with some details. So let's pretend, you know, if this is a big cut into the hull of this device, whatever it is, whatever sci-fi thing I've started drawing here. You know, maybe you're meant to be able to access these cylinders, and they're meant to be exposed. So we might have some cues along the hull of this thing that say, you know, there's a big separation in the in the device, and there's a couple plates and a couple details that sort of echo, what's going on down here. Could even bring these details up from the bottom, and maybe there's all kinds of ports and hatches back here that kind of echo this big opening. Details, really. Let's pretend the opening goes along the width of the object also. Maybe there's some sort of handle or hatch back here that coincides with all that. We can do the same thing here. I'll just draw a simple plate or a seam that echoes this cut or this opening, kind of brings everything together. And these details and these sort of echoing lines will obscure the bigger, simpler subtractions I made, and all of a sudden things start to look a little more cohesive. So we'll add just a little detail down here, maybe some more seams and a plate. Show the construction and how things have come together a little bit. Now I'm off into the details, right? We're not talking about big, simple subtractions anymore. I'm now just sort of enjoying this, sketch, right? But now that look what's happened is that I started with a very, very simple first step. But now that I've done some work to integrate those simple changes into the rest of the shape, it looks much more cohesive. And also, I think what has happened is the fact that I started with such a simple shape and I made such simple subtractions to it. Those steps I've made have been not necessarily hidden, but they've been sort of obscured by the fact that I've tried to bring everything together into a cohesive design, right? So let's say I'm not completely happy with this, and I think it's kind of missing a little bit over here somehow. So I'm going to take, and this will all start to tie in a little more as we get further into the lessons, but what I'm seeing is the flow of the shape goes this way, and I want to add on some stuff here. So I think an easy thing to do is just extend these cylinders out. So I'm just going to do that. And again, going even back to the first lesson, I'm just going to add cylinders back here. Cylinders, one of the simplest shapes to draw and conceive of. I'm just going to add them poking out of the back of the shape, add some detail, maybe work on the transitions a little bit. But in my mind, all I'm really doing back here is adding. It's a little loose, sorry, a little bit sketchy, but I've just added cylinders and made the shape more complicated. So there you have it. Kind of a simple way to use subtraction to get to something more complicated. Now, I'm going to do another demo using subtraction, and instead of a simple sort of I'm gonna do a demo of the cutaway method, of the cutaway method, and I'm gonna show one more technique where instead of removing the material and making it, disappear, I'm gonna remove some material and I'm going to move it away from the shape and use it to extend the design and use it as plating. Alright, so we're on to our last example in this lesson. And I'm starting with the same shape, as you can see, and I just kind of drew myself out a cut line. And so I'm going to use this line to basically separate, like remove the bottom part of the material, bottom part of the shape, and pull it away from the body, right? And I've already actually done that on another layer. So here it is. But you can see I just sort of use that red line to cut in. And instead of, like I was saying before, instead of just removing that material and moving on and going forward with the design, I kept it and just separated it, right? So now I have some room to work in here, and I've exposed either some more internals or guts of this machine, or I've maybe like it's a contraption of some sort that needs to open up, so it's some sort of hatch or door. But I know that if that's the case, the two pieces line up, and they're, if this were to come back, it would look closed and it would look like one object. In fact, let me just try that. So I use this kind of trick a lot, whether I am, sorry, just messing with my layers here, whether I'm doing either of those that I just described. I'm making some sort of contraption that is like it has its internals exposed for whatever reason that I want in the design, or there's like a hatch or a panel on it that opens and moves to expose something, whether it's like some sort of radar or weapon system, or lenses, or a hatch for someone to come out of, or whatever. It doesn't really matter. It's just that I'm using this simple step to start designing the shape. And the big advantage here is that I find when I do this kind of thing, I have this common seam line, and even if these two shapes, oops, I lost my pressure again, hang on, boop, let's see here, there we go. Even if these two shapes aren't touching, I feel like the viewer can sense, the connection between them, and it kind of lines up in a way that makes sense to the eye. So, and of course, because of a couple reasons, these lines, they match up. But I also think on some level, the viewer sort of registers that, this piece plus this piece creates, this piece, right? If that makes any sense. And anyway, so that's kind of my own sort of way of looking at it, my own weird little theory. But once again, I just want to reiterate that this is another simple step you can do to design a more complicated shape. So, with that said, let me figure out where my layers are and move on. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of I'm going to fill the space between these and sort of connect them somehow so that I bring them together again. I've sort of like, I've split them apart in a simple way, and now I'm going to unify them once again by designing stuff that goes between them. I can get really, really complicated with this stuff. I can go nuts in here and make all kinds of lattices and, devices and tubes and, we can go crazy. I mean, I could do a whole exposed engine right there. But for this example, rather, I'm going to keep it a little more straightforward. So just to show you that, again, I just want you to make the simple step of subtracting a piece, moving it away, and then having room to play in. So let's see. I don't want the silhouette to be really simple like that. It could be actually. Let's see. So I'm going to kind of think and draw while I talk. I think I'm going to have this thing be some sort of like industrial cooling chamber or something. Like maybe these have to be exposed to the air to vent heat or something. Let's see, I'm just kind of thinking out loud here. And again, so that I don't, overwhelm myself, I can start with really simple shapes, right? Going back to even the first lesson. I can just slowly start to fill this space. Like, for example, what I'm doing here is just with some cylinders tilted at an angle, right? Really simple stuff. When I'm only concentrating on the step that I'm doing at the moment, it's not very overwhelming, and I know I can work towards something, fairly complicated just by building it up like this. And that's kind of the fun. So let's see. I like those. I want them to be a little longer. Fill that space a little bit. So yeah. Let's see. Got some cylinders. Pretty simple. And let me make a quick note here. I went through the trouble of drawing out this separation line. First, I drew the whole entire shape, right? Then I drew that separation line. And then I showed you, carefully how I pulled this plate away. You don't always have to do that. If you get used to thinking in these terms, and envisioning kind of the separation lines a little bit before you get started drawing, you can kind of jump right in. You can kind of jump right into drawing, this piece and this piece without having to go through this kind of meticulous, careful process. By all means, if you want to do it the careful way and you want to build out your shapes slowly but surely, please do it. I can't encourage you more to take your time, play with the tricks, play with the techniques, and see where it gets you. But all I'm saying is it's not necessarily. I went through the steps so that it was very clear, and you knew kind of where I was going, or you knew like exactly kind of what the steps were that were going on in my head. So you don't have to be that careful every time. You can just jump in and start having fun. So I like these big cylinders. Again, I want to keep this simple. I've kind of sketched a little bit of a framing, like a scaffold kind of frame around this so that maybe they're protected or something. And again, for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to keep this simple. So I'm just going to fill this kind of space in over here with a big blocky chunk. Just like that, actually. Maybe I'll put one underneath. It's not too complicated. It's just basically a big cube right here that I've split this way. And that feels very sort of stiff, so I might throw some angles in here. And again, you have to bear with me while I think and design see how hard it is to draw and talk and chew gum and do concept art at the same time. This just tall flat line feels a little stiff, but I think I'm going to try to maybe put another shape coming out here, extending. There we go. Okay, that feels a little better. And this back here is negative space, so I'm thinking that this is just some sort of roll cage or something, protecting these Freon nitrogen canisters or whatever sci-fi excuse I want to come up with to have a bunch of cylinders. So let's see, where did I go here? This is my framing, and yeah, if this seems complicated, I'm sorry, I don't want it to be. I just want to show that by subtracting out a piece and not removing it but moving it elsewhere is another approach to designing, and that for me, one of my favorite results that it gets me is that it makes the drawing feel like I'm showing the insides of something and of a machine, and then that typically for me gets me thinking about exposed machinery, and things get a little more complicated, but meaning more more detailed and intricate like I'm drawing now. But that doesn't have to be the case for you if you don't want it to. You have the option to use this in as simple or as a complicated way as you want. It's like I just want to give you different ways of doing things so that you have a vocabulary of tricks to pull from. That really is my goal. So I don't know if the sketch is getting too messy, but these right here are the tops of these cylinders that are on their sides. And I'm just doing a little cleanup before I start another layer. I don't think this is necessary. Alright, let's see what happens. So I have I just want to, because I'm afraid of overwhelming people. If there are any beginners or people who are just trying to keep things simple, I don't want to go too fast for you. So I know this red sketch is really messy, but really what I've done is I put a block right here. I've kind of extruded almost a cube down here, just a chunk, and I've tapered two of the corners there. And then back here, the majority of this is 6 cylinders laying at an angle. And again, I think it's actually, now that I'm thinking about it, it's kind of like, I feel like it's a good example of the thinking from the first lesson, right? These shapes by themselves are not very complicated, but together, they make something a little more fun. Okay, let's move forward a little bit. Let me see if I can just cut right into this and get it going. So, I'm not crazy about this, but that's okay. I'd probably like to add maybe a shape here of I don't know, some chassis or some railing, to some framing that looks like it's keeping everything together. This feels a little unbalanced in terms of being like a solid looking mechanism, but that's okay for now. we'll talk about that stuff in later lessons. So if this looks complicated to you, I don't want you to worry about it. I think it's maybe getting a little detailed because I did this railing, I did this like framing here, and there's maybe more detail on here than there needs to be, but that's also okay, because I think the bigger, simpler shapes are the most visible. Meaning, there's still some big, simple things to look at. So this is kind of what I mean when I say the cutaway method. We cut away some material. Down here, we cut away some of the skin or some of the plating and showed some exposed stuff, some guts. Same as up here. I'm kind of making up shapes to fill the space, and I also added a little bit of this framing here. And if you notice, this part of the framing follows this line, so it looks like it's still a cohesive part of the machine. So keep that in the back of your head if you're using this technique. Don't just add in a bunch of random, sort of loose, open-ended shapes that don't always, what am I trying to say? That don't, that depart from the original overall form. It's always nice when the details, especially in machinery, like I was saying, a lot of times things kind of flow together. all the straight lines run together in lots of different things. Vehicles, weapons, so on and so forth. But all I'm really trying to point out is that one of the details I added here flows, and which is one of the things that helps it work. It makes it still look like a solid machine, even though there's some exposed stuff right here. This was from earlier. We were just kind of getting started. So up here we have kind of a more complicated example. We kept this part and we moved it down to here, right? And then I filled in the space, most of the space, with some big cylinders. I want to fill this in or something. Something about this looks a little funny. I'd love to tweak it a little more before it feels totally done. But I hope that it's really, really clear to you how we started with a, this simple shape. We cut into it. We separated it, and then we added a few things. A bunch of these things flowed with the hole that it made. So that was, in a way, it's kind of a very easy step, because these cylinders are not complicated shapes. There's just 6 of them stacked up in a row. Another thing that happens a lot in machinery, which is repetition, especially with industrial machinery or engines and stuff like that. So I lined up 6 cylinders and I turned them on their side to go at the exact same angle as the plate cuts that I had gotten from before. So I hope that made sense. And I hope you can see how subtracting and removing material gives you lots of options in terms of taking a simple shape and elaborating on it, making it more complicated if you want to, or just refining it in a way that is easy to do and can keep things harmonious without making them too busy. So I'm gonna try and clean this guy up just a little bit more, and I'll put it. I'll probably fast forward through that just to get to the point and see where we end up. All right, so I cleaned up the sketch a little bit. I kind of filled in the gaps and added some more of the framing and stuff. And it's okay. I could keep working on this. I don't think it flows very well, but I do think that it's a good example of the technique I'm talking about here. You know, I made this space for myself, and I just kind of filled it in with some tech. And you know, it comes back to the kind of the point of this whole lesson, and these a lot of these beginning lessons, which is, you know, I started with something very simple and it's not very complicated, and I make some simple changes. I take some simple steps, and it either directly allows room for some cool changes, or it gives me the space to add more and make it more complicated. So, excuse me. So, yeah, that just about wraps it up. But before I end it, I wanted to show one more example of this technique. Something I did just for myself because I thought it'd be fun, and it's more complicated than this one. It's the same shapes, but to start with, but it's definitely more detailed. A good example of how far this technique can go, and you know, if you want how much detail or how deep you can go into this kind of process, it's the exact same starting point. You know, I had this big shape, and I cut it open and I moved the parts, and I started adding some framing here, some lines that echo the pieces I already had to make things simpler for myself. And then I just kept adding on, and before I knew it, I thought, oh, I'll put a big, you know, thick something here, and it turned into a gun, and you know, I added the ammo chain, and you know, there you go. So this is, like I said, this is sort of where, you know, the potential of where you can end up with a technique like this. You know, you don't have to do it exactly the way I showed it or the examples I gave. You know, you can take it in your own way. And here's an example of me just kind of having fun with it. All right, guys. Hope you enjoyed, and thanks very much. See you on the next one.